The morning after the system spoke his name, Black Veil High School felt different. Not louder. Not more chaotic. The opposite, more silent. The kind of silence that doesn't come from calm but from anticipation. Like the entire building was holding its breath, waiting for something to crack. Students who had spent years learning exactly how loud they were allowed to be, exactly how much space they were allowed to take up, were now moving through the hallways with a new kind of careful. Because last night, the system had said a name none of them had heard before. And this morning that name was walking toward them. Seo Jin-woo moved through the corridor at the same pace he always moved. Unhurried. Unbothered. Not performing calm, actually calm, which was somehow more unsettling than anything loud could have been. Students parted without being asked to. Not the way they parted for Taeyong, out of learned fear, out of knowing what happened to people who didn't move fast enough. This was different. This was the parting that happens when people encounter something they don't have a category for yet and their instinct takes over before their brain can. Two students near the lockers whispered to each other without turning their heads. He's the one the system flagged last night. Don't look directly at him. They say if you get marked next to him, you disappear. Jin-woo heard both of them. Every word. He didn't slow down. Didn't look toward them. Just kept walking, and the information settled into him the way all information settled into him. Filed, noted, added to the picture he was building of how this place actually worked beneath everything it showed on the surface. He turned the corner and Jang Taeyong was already there. But something was wrong with the image. Taeyong always moved with a specific kind of mass. Not just his own body but the weight of everyone behind him, the silent communication of numbers that said this is not one person, this is a system. This morning the students behind him were fewer. Their shoulders were lower. The confidence that usually radiated backward through his group like heat from a fire was flickering, uneven, like something had gotten into it overnight and eaten at it from the inside. Taeyong's eyes were sharp. But sharp in a different way than usual, not the sharpness of control but the sharpness of something trying very hard to hold its shape. He stopped in front of Jin-woo. You caused this. Jin-woo looked at him. Steady. Unhurried. I didn't do anything. Taeyong's jaw tightened. Something moved behind his eyes. Not anger yet, not fully, but the thing that comes before anger when you realize that the answer you just received is more threatening than any aggressive one could have been. That's exactly the problem, he said quietly. The hallway held its breath. Then movement, from behind Taeyong. One of his own students stepped forward. Not toward Taeyong. Not to Jin-woo's side exactly. Just forward into the space between them like he was positioning himself relative to something that had shifted. He kept his eyes down. His hands weren't steady. Then he bowed. Not to Taeyong. The silence that followed was absolute. Taeyong turned slowly. The kind of slow that happens when your body hasn't fully accepted what your eyes just showed it. What are you doing? Not a question. The words were too flat to be a question. The student's voice came out uneven, like he had rehearsed it and the rehearsal wasn't holding up now that the moment was actually here. The system updated the rankings last night. He swallowed. The new hierarchy, it places him above you. The word above landed in the hallway like something physical. Taeyong didn't move for a full 3 seconds. Not anger. Disbelief first, always disbelief first because the mind protects itself by refusing the information before it processes it. His entire identity inside this school, inside this system, had been built on a single assumption. That his position was something he held, something with mass and permanence, something that belonged to him the way your own name belongs to you. The assumption had just been reclassified. Jin-woo stepped forward slightly. Just one step. His voice was quiet enough that only the people close to him could hear it. So your power was never yours. Taeyong grabbed the student's collar. Fast, hard, both hands. The reaction of someone whose control over a situation has slipped and whose body is trying to re-establish it through the only language it knows. Who authorized that? Who gave the system permission to? Black Veil authorized it, the student said. Nobody gave permission. It just happened. Taeyong released him. Not because he chose to. Because the grip suddenly had no purpose. You cannot hold on to something that has already moved. Behind him, another student took a small step backward. Then another. Not running. Not leaving. Just repositioning. The way people unconsciously reposition themselves when the center of gravity in a room changes. Small movements. Quiet betrayals. Each one individually meaningless, collectively devastating. From the staircase at the end of the hallway came a sound. Slow. Deliberate. Rhythmic. Applause. Choi Min-jae descended the stairs with both hands moving at exactly the pace that communicates the maximum amount of condescension with the minimum amount of effort. His uniform was perfect. His expression was the kind of amused that only looks like entertainment when underneath it is something being very carefully observed and catalogued. That he looked at Taeyong first, then at Jin-woo, then back at Taeyong with the specific expression of someone watching a prediction come true. "A king who loses his throne overnight," he said pleasantly. "I wasn't sure the system was capable of moving that fast." Taeyong turned on him instantly. "You're behind this. You moved something, you accessed the..." "No." Min-jae's voice didn't change. Didn't rise, didn't harden. Just said the word with the absolute confidence of someone who doesn't need to defend themselves because the truth is doing it for them. "I didn't touch anything." Pause. "The system did." Which means you should be asking yourself a different question. "What question?" "Why?" Min-jae said simply. "The system decided you were no longer valid." The word valid hit something. Taeyong's breathing changed, just slightly, just enough for the people close enough to notice. Because valid wasn't the word you used for a person. It was the word you used for a code, a credential, a permission level in a system that had just decided to revoke it. From the dark corridor to the left, cold air seemed to arrive before Han Jae-kyung did. He appeared at the edge of the hallway without announcement, without the sound of footsteps that should have preceded him. He stood at the boundary between shadow and light and looked at the scene in front of him with eyes that registered everything and reacted to none of it. "The balance is broken," he said. His voice was low, not dramatic, just factual, the way you state something you've been watching approach for a long time. He looked at Jin-woo. A long look. The kind that isn't hostile but isn't comfortable either, the look of someone taking a genuine measurement. "Or maybe," he said, "it was always fake." The hallway was completely still. Taeyong looked around himself. His members, the ones still present, were avoiding his eyes. Not dramatically. Just the small, consistent eye contact avoidance of people who have already made a decision internally and haven't announced it yet. Min-jae was watching with that pleasant, calculating expression. Jae-kyung hadn't moved. And Jin-woo stood in the center of all of it without having raised his voice once, without having made a single aggressive movement. And somehow the entire room had organized itself around him like he was a fixed point that everything else was being measured against. Taeyong's voice came out lower than he intended. "You think this makes you king?" Jin-woo looked at him. And there was nothing cruel in his expression. Nothing triumphant. Just a kind of clarity, the clarity of someone stating something simple that has been complicated by other people for too long. "No," he said. "It just confirms you were never one." The school speakers activated. Not the broken bell sound from before. Something sharper. Something that cut through the air of the hallway and reached every corner of every room simultaneously. Every student in the building felt it before they heard the words. First blood rule initiated. Taeyong's face changed completely. "No. Current district leader, invalid." The word echoed off every wall. And every student in that hallway, every student who had spent years learning exactly what the system's voice meant, turned and looked at Jang Taeyong. Not with satisfaction. Not with cruelty. With the particular look people give something they used to have power over them when they realize it no longer does. Complicated, relieved, slightly afraid of what comes next. Taeyong stepped back. One step. The first time Jin-woo had seen him step back voluntarily, and it meant something different than when he'd stepped back in the hallway yesterday. Yesterday was instinct. Today was the beginning of understanding. Then one of his students spoke. "I choose new authority." The bow was small. Barely a tilt of the head. But in the grammar of Black Veil it was a sentence. A complete, irreversible sentence. Then another student. Then another. Not rushing. Not performing. Each one making a quiet individual decision that happened to align with every other quiet individual decision, and the cumulative effect was watching something that had taken years to build come apart in under 2 minutes. Taeyong turned with each one, tracking them, and each time he turned there were fewer people looking back at him. "You were mine," he said. The anger was gone from his voice. What was left was something rawer, the confusion of someone who built their entire understanding of loyalty on fear and is now discovering, in the worst possible way, that fear and loyalty are not the same thing. Min-jae's voice came from behind him, almost gentle. "They were never yours." Taeyong charged. The decision happened in his body before it reached his mind, the last resort of someone who has lost every other tool available to them. He moved toward Jin-woo with the full weight of everything he'd built, everything he'd maintained, everything he was watching dissolve, and then stopped. Not physically stopped. Something stopped. The air changed. His body refused the next movement the way a locked door refuses a wrong key. He stood frozen mid-motion, close enough to Jin-woo that the distance between them was almost nothing. Jin-woo didn't move back, didn't raise his hands, just looked at him. "You built everything on people who never chose you," he said quietly. "The system didn't take your power. You never had it." Taeyong's rank disappeared from the screens across the hallway walls simultaneously. His name simply removed, like a file being closed. He looked at the empty space where his name had been. "I was replaced," he said. His voice had lost everything that had been in it before. "By nothing. By truth," Jin-woo said. The speakers activated again. Second phase unlocking. Pause. Static. Then the voice returned with something new in it, not the flat command tone, but something that felt almost like it was reading from a list it had been waiting to read from for a long time. Elimination list generated. Jin-woo looked up at the nearest screen. For the first time since he had walked through those gates, something moved in his expression that wasn't controlled. Not fear, but the recognition of a variable he hadn't fully calculated. "Elimination," he said quietly, to himself. The system's response came immediately. "You are on the list too." The hallway went completely silent. Min-jae's applause stopped. Jae-kyung, who had been turning to leave, went still. And Jin-woo stood looking at the screen with his name on it, not erased this time, not returned, but listed, and understood that the game he had walked back into was larger than the one he had been shown. He had come back to dismantle a system. The system had been waiting for him to try.